You are listening to an American Free Press podcast.
Joining me on the line is Dr. Kevin Barrett. Kevin, thanks for joining us today.
Well, thanks, Dave. Good to be with you again.
Kev, last time we spoke was right on the eve of the Million American March Against Fear, which occurred on September 11th at noon in Washington, D.C. People were asking me, how did that go? And I said, you know what, I don't know, but I'm going to be talking to Kevin shortly, so I'll let you know. So why don't you let the listeners know, Kev, how did it go?
Well, it was really amazing event. And, it was obviously not a million people. In a way, it's kind of amusing. It kind of made me think of these media pranks that have been played in which people were able to draw the mainstream media to cover the event in such a way that it reveals the complete gullibility and unreliability of mainstream reporting. And in this case, I think in a sense, it was a kind of a media stunt that really made its point beautifully. Now, the point that it was trying to make is that the U.S. has been ruled by the politics of fear since 9/11. Particularly Muslims have been terrorized. We're all afraid we're going to be sent to Guantanamo. Non-Muslim Americans have been terrorized of the evil, scary Muslims, who, of course, in reality, there's no terrorist threat. You're more likely to be hit by lightning. The Muslims only do 6% of the terrorist attacks. According to the FBI, the radical Jews do 7%, etc. Reality has nothing whatsoever to do with this kind of divide and conquer attack, dividing Muslims from non-Muslim Americans.
Right.
And so this event was sort of designed to illustrate this, that there is this politics of fear. So we assumed that even though every Muslim in America should come out, should go to D.C. and hold a sign up saying Muslims had nothing to do with 9/11, this is a fraud, this is a witch hunt, this is worse than Nazi Germany, but of course they're afraid to. And likewise, the media is naturally going to look at this kind of event and try to whip up fear and hysteria around it. And that's exactly what they did. And so we got a very small turnout, especially of Muslims. Hardly any Muslims were brave enough to go and basically offer themselves up as a human sacrifice to the Hell's Angels. Supposedly there were going to be 2 million Hell's Angels coming to kill everybody at this march.
Right.
Of course, that didn't happen. But Fox News had run with this idea and scared everybody, basically put out this message that evil Muslims are coming to desecrate the sacred holiday of human sacrifice on September 11th. So they stimulated this huge backlash. And this group called 2 Million Bikers to D.C. began with literally hundreds of death threats against us. That's how that group started.
Wow.
And then quickly they realized they'd better pull back. And so then they tried to reframe themselves as a legitimate counter-protest. And then they tried to even pull back from that and say they weren't even a counter-protest. In any case, there was nothing remotely close to 1 million Muslims or 1 million people, 1 million brave Americans showing up. It was even further from 2 million bikers. We only saw a few dozen bikers in the entire huge area where we were by the mall. And the handful, maybe 1 dozen that actually showed up and got close enough where we could see them individually off of their bikes, ended up joining us. Particular one guy from Alabama, well, actually he and his wife and a couple other people had come all the way from Alabama on motorcycles, and they decided they wanted to join us. They said, would it be okay if we took our sign, One Nation Under God, and stood with you guys? And we said, yeah, we love that slogan. Come on. So we got wall-to-wall national and international media coverage out of this on zero money. So the media return on investment for this event was probably the highest of any event in American history.
Fair and balanced reporting, right?
Yeah, exactly. It was quite an affair. And the coolest thing, to my mind, about it was the quality of the people was just really, really high. And at the end, we had Merlin Miller, who was the presidential candidate I voted for.
So did I.
Yeah, hey, all right.
He was in Jersey, so.
Yeah. So he came and did a real good talk. Webster Tarpley, and then finally Cornel West was the keynote speaker. This was a high-powered group of people with those 3 guys finishing it up. So I felt like I'm really in the middle of the quality people, the courageous people, and you had to be really courageous to show up, and join like maybe, 100 people there at this march, supposedly who were going to be beat up and killed by 2 million bikers. It was sort of like the story of Karbala in Islam, where the Prophet's grandson Hussein showed up to fight a gigantic army with him and just a handful of people. And of course, they just got slaughtered. But that's resonated through history as a symbol of bravery and courageous integrity and standing with what's right, what's righteous, standing with God. And that's kind of what this event was. And in that respect, it was a supreme success. And I think it kicked down the door of fear. And I think in the future, we will see a lot more people, in particular Muslims, breaking out of this web of fear that these evil 9/11 criminal spiders have spun around us. And so I felt like it was kind of a history-making, almost mythological event.
That's great. Was there any mainstream media coverage?
Tons of it, yeah.
Of course, they covered it, but I'm not a TV watcher. Did they actually play you guys on television?
I know it was covered on Press TV and Russia Today, of course. Press TV did a pretty good job. Russia Today, not quite so much. It wasn't my favorite Russia Today episode.
Wow.
As far as the mainstream stuff, I haven't seen the mainstream TV coverage, but newspaper coverage, I've seen some of it. And the Washington Post, believe it or not, actually gave us pretty decent coverage. They had a huge spread, this 2-page spread about the commemorations of 9/11 around the country and in Washington. And we were the featured item, and It was actually, neutral to almost favorable coverage, which blew my mind. I think the Zionist propaganda minister at the Washington Post must have been on vacation that day.
So it started around noontime, and I think you said it was like around 13th or 14th Street. And then what happened after that point, and how long did it actually last?
Well, it went on as planned until a little bit after 2, and then the March Against Drones guys took off leading this march from the mall to the Capitol and the White House. Now, I couldn't go on the march. I have a bad hip, so I didn't actually get to experience the fun and games on the march. I think there was one sort of confrontation with a relatively small group of bikers at one point, but it didn't really amount to anything. I think the marchers just walked right through the bikers. And
Hells Angels, they're not a fun bunch of guys. I remember once, these decades ago, I was in New York City, and one of them bumped into me, and I just immediately jumped, and somebody said, "No, it's the Hells Angels. You can't say anything to them. They can bump into you if they want."
Yeah.
So, you don't want to mess with those guys, I guess. But anything planned for next year or before that?
Well, there's all kinds of talk about various follow-up ideas. I know that, Muslims for Liberty, Will Cole and those people who are a really good group, they didn't actually participate as a group in this particular event, but I think they're looking at doing a sort of an unofficial follow-up event in the spring, is the last I heard. And so they were looking at doing a pro-freedom event, something like, "We love our freedoms." Muslims out there protesting in D.C. against this fascism post-9/11, saying, "We love our freedoms. We'll defend them. We want the Constitution back," which I think is a great message for Muslims to be sending. And then next 9/11, there will presumably be another 9/11 commemoration event. I don't know if it'll be exactly the same. I mean, maybe the name will change. Possibly AMPAC, the American Muslim Political Action Committee, will not be the lead sponsor the way it was this year. But I think there will be another similar event in D.C. next September 11th as well.
Dr. Kevin Barrett, the main organizer of the Million American March Against Fear that took place on September 11th in our nation's capital. Kevin, I want to thank you again for all the time you took out to explain all this to listeners, and looking forward to speaking to you in the future.
Okay, thanks, Dave. Keep up the good work.